Tomos, thank you so much for joining us on Coastal Catch-ups. I know you're flat out with the work you're doing at the minute, but how are you doing?
Good, thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to speak to a fellow enthusiast of the marine world and the environment. So yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah, it's such a hot topic at the minute, between the energy transition, decarbonisation, the energy grid, and then water quality, ecology. So there's a lot going on. So yeah, we should have a lot to talk about. Just to start, Thomas, could you give us a background in your career and what you're up to now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I've taken quite a bit of an arc of my journey. I'd definitely say I've been part of the energy transition, as it were. So I started off as a geologist. So my background is in geoscience, and pursued that for several years, and ended up working at Shell over in Houston in the USA. And so, as you can imagine, that's pretty full on out there, and very much head in the rocks. But I had quite an interesting job of leading field trips. So I was taking groups of people out into the all across the states, places on the Texas coast, looking at the marine life, places inland in Utah, places in Arizona, just looking at the geology, teaching geologists how to be better geologists, and ultimately find more oil in a better way. Um, but as time went by, definitely felt the urge to do something a bit bigger with my career, a bit more something that would give back to society. And I slowly made the transition, looking at things like carbon capture and storage, geothermal, looking at hydrogen. And this was just purely off my own back, looking at research, getting involved in groups that were out there. And this was in the infancy of the energy transition. So there's still a lot of work going on pre-COVID. And then I came back to the UK, and just before COVID, and COVID hit. And I think that's where we see the biggest change in the energy industry's emphasis, where we just saw so much investment suddenly going into renewable energy. And it was at that point I joined RPS, to focus initially on skills development and learning, with very much a mind on the energy transition, given my background and experience. And then subsequently went into their energy transition team, where a lot of the business, a lot of the focus is on offshore wind. And then moving a bit, sort of fast forwarding a couple of years, I'm a very proud Welshman. I speak Welsh. I wanted to move back to Wales, and it just so happened that we have a rather large offshore leasing round coming up in the Celtic Sea. And so an opportunity to join WSP as their Celtic Sea lead presented itself. And so that's where I find myself now. It's quite an organic process, I would say, but it's not been without effort. But I will say that, that I set out with that ambition sort of 5 or 6 years ago, that I wanted to develop a career back in Wales, and contribute to the little part of the country that I can. I might not be able to change the world, but I might be able to change something very locally, something I'm very passionate about. Is the redevelopment and reskilling of folks in South Wales from that industrial heritage. So yeah, that's where I am now.
Very good. Yeah, the Celtic Sea round. It's gonna, I assume it's gonna be busy, and then there's going to be a lot of work coming from it. So it's nice to, yeah, you touch on the industrial heritage and kind of a new era, of work coming down the line. I also like the storyline of going from Shell as a geologist now in uh, the carbon transition. I think there's a story in that, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely a few ups and downs in between. I should say that I met my wife in the US, and we moved over here, and then had a little boy during COVID, and so all of these things sort of transpired as we went along the journey. And the further I moved into renewable energy, the more I knew I'd made the right choice. Having my son is a massive motivating factor. Just all that commitment to a cleaner future. I mean, we really lucky. We live in a little house down by the River Taff. And the other day, he was playing in it, and just throwing stones, right? And there's this little bit of me that's just so conscious of like, wow, this the fact that he can do this is great, because we've improved the river quality to that level. But equally, I'm so conscious of all of the things that are going on at the moment in water quality, and the sewage being put into the river. So it's really interesting. It makes, when you have a child, it really makes you look at a different perspective, and you really start thinking about all these different aspects. And yeah, so the Crown Estate's announcement last week about the Celtic Sea, it couldn't have aligned better to sort of my own principles, and that they are saying now, they really want any sort of proposition that comes in from a developer. They want to see where that emphasis is on skills, environmental benefits, how they're going to address inequality, and communities to really be put at the heart of that social value module. So it's really important that those things aren't overlooked. It's very tempting to look at those things with, oh well, it's a bit of verbiage, but it has the potential to make real lasting impact. Both my grandfathers were coal miners, and so they retired, or mid 70s, late 70s, when the mining industry was still there, but it was on its last legs. And then subsequently, I've seen it, granted from afar. I've seen those communities go into disrepair. They've struggled to find work that's lasted over a long period of time. And so I'm really committed personally to those kind of to strive to those targets, and hopefully people will take them seriously. And the fact that the Crown Estate has announced those priorities is a great sign.
Just for anyone listening, so we're talking about leasing rounds and Crown Estate. Could you give just a brief overview of how that works, and the process behind that?
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a mystery, really.
That's why I
asked. So the Crown Estate will identify a series of areas that they are essentially willing to permit developers to come in and develop an offshore wind farm. That's it in a nutshell. It takes into various considerations, environmental factors, its location with regards to shipping, how far it is offshore. A lot of the offshore wind farms we've currently got in the North Sea and around Scotland, they are anchored to the base of the seabed using some kind of foundations. The interesting thing about the Celtic Sea is that it will be that much further offshore, and thus using floating wind technology. And so the idea is deeper water, further out, less visual impact. There are definitely environmental factors that we need to consider in these type of areas, particularly when we look about marine mammal migration, ornithology and all this kind of stuff. But I think crucially, because it's further offshore, it should reduce some of the environmental impacts. At least that's the theory. How that all comes together is something that consultants and developers are all working together on at the moment. And that's another big difference you see between the renewable energy industry on the whole. I would say this is true anyway, and the oil and gas industry, is there is a lot more collaboration. A lot of projects that come to fruition in a positive manner are usually down to collaboration, and that was difficult to achieve in the oil and gas industry because of the competitive nature of it at the time.
In terms of collaboration, then, I assume you work with individuals from various different disciplines and technical backgrounds. How do you promote collaboration? Because it's an industry. I was reading a paper there last week, and it was almost a literature review of the environmental impacts from offshore wind, and I think the figure was like 75% of the publications have came in the last 8 years. So very, very young, and a lot of research coming on. So knowledge sharing for me would be probably up there as one of the number one things you have to do. How do you go about, and maybe skills you picked up beforehand and when you were working for Shell, how do you bring that into the industry now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question, and honestly, I think it's something that we still struggle with simply because of how busy everybody is. I was speaking with somebody the other day about decommissioning, and well, the guidebook on decommissioning is yet to be written, but we need to start thinking about these things because they're going to come down the road in the next 10, 15 years, and that may seem a long way, but it really isn't. That will happen so fast. And the industry is crying out for people to get involved, and so knowledge sharing becomes even more important when you're bringing on folks who are new to even just the energy industry, let alone offshore wind. I think what you have to do is prioritize it, that you have to demonstrate that how important it is to almost cross skill knowledge between different disciplines, so you have an awareness of what's going on. Now certainly some areas do work together quite closely, particularly when we look at some of the environment, the EIA survey work that's being done. But there are other areas that are, I think you need to bring them along a bit more, and engage them and say, look, this is why you want to do this, because there might be duplication of work here. There's definitely ways that we can streamline some of this work. But not only that, it's building that buy-in from the team that you essentially establish around a project, that you're contributing to a bigger goal. You're contributing to a something that's worthwhile, something that is making a difference. And so, just like any big project, your PM and the project director that will be driving this, it's incredibly important to get that right. And unfortunately, I think that's the bit that we do struggle with, just simply because of capacity, simply because everybody is so busy. And that's not a bad thing, but I think if we could just get our capacity right, and I think this is across the board really, if you just get the capacity right, enough people here, we would be able to do things that are much more collaborative, allow folks that time to skill correctly, and knowledge share. We strive to do it in WSP by encouraging sort of monthly meetings. We get town halls together where we share problems, where we try to think about that sort of cognitive diversity. So we would look at, okay, you might not be involved in perhaps the EIA directly, but you've been involved in certain parts of that process, and so you might be able to offer a different perspective on how you might approach that problem. And I think you can use those type of tools and scenarios in any part of a development. So yeah, it's a really important thing, that cross skilling. I think a bit overlooked again.
Maybe a podcast in offshore energy is required.
There's a few out there. There's a few, and I think that that they do a good job of giving, sort of overview of a summary of what's going on in the industry, and there's always things popping up. But skills and learning has never been, I don't know, it's not really a sexy topic. I think if you talk to most sort of project managers or line managers, they're like, oh, well, how long is that going to take them away from the project? And it's seeing the value in it overall. And I think that generally people talk the talk, don't perhaps walk the walk. Now, there are tools that are coming out that are making this a little bit easier, but ultimately, I think it's really about investing in people, and that goes for folks who are new to the industry and looking at it, and also people who are already in it that may have had sort of 10 years experience. But yeah, it's keeping up to date with that literature will be important. When I look back at Shell, I look back at that sort of career with the oil and gas industry around that sort of 2011, 2012. Was a vast amount of money being spent on skills development, and that was simply because they understood the value in training the staff. There's an element of retention of that, so people know that they're going to get skilled up, and they're going to, you know, increase their knowledge in an area which they're passionate about. And so that enables them to be, you know, retained by the company. But also the science, the information, the knowledge changes all the time. It's always being updated. Perhaps we're not quite there yet in the renewables industry as a whole. You know, or perhaps that offshore wind, you know, purely speaking from my own experience now, but you know, perhaps that isn't there yet in the industry. Certainly, you know, you can make the argument, well, it's a standardization, you know, with geology, looking at things from the subsurface aspect. But, you know, as you've just said, you know, most of the articles out there are less than 7 years old. So, I mean, how many folks in the industry could say, well, I'm up to date with all that literature? Go back to 2012, 2013, and I asked a group of geoscientists in the oil and gas industry, how many people have read this paper, that paper? Most of them would have said yes, or I saw that bit of research, because they know that that's directly applicable to something that they're working on. It's directly applicable to how much money they're going to make ultimately, you know, I mean, to be brutal about it. But the monetary fact of it now is, well, if you know that bit of research, you're a better environmental scientist, you are better at your job. Your capital, as it were, is how you can improve the environment, how you can make this wind farm, you know, better, how less impact on the environment. And so yeah, I think that that has to happen at some point. Again, it's just all happened so quickly that people are rushing to catch up.
Yeah. The learning and development part of your career, I was actually surprised. I didn't know you did that. Where did that come from? Do you enjoy the teaching and seeing people develop, or how did you get into that, Thomas?
Yeah, so my first passion is being outside. I can't admit that, you know, I started off with a grand plan. I mean, I didn't know what I wanted to do until I was about 30, if I'm really honest. But so at 22, I'd just done my master's and I was looking for jobs. This was around 2008, 2009. So the economy was absolutely terrible. There wasn't a great deal of jobs out there. But I found a job at a company called Nautilus that were a geoscience training company. They specifically took groups of geoscientists around the world. I mean, everywhere, Australia, Borneo, Canada, US, all across Europe, took these folks on field trips to learn about geology. And they were running, well, I think it was 100 odd plus. That was at their peak at the time, each year. And so it was very busy. And as a 22-year-old just out of school, you know, to be given the opportunity is like, hey, you know, you're going to get qualification in mountain leadership. You're going to get all this exposure to all these geoscientists that know, you know, world-class outcrops, you know, make all these contacts. It was just such an absolutely awesome opportunity. And that was, yeah, three and a bit fantastic years there. So yeah, it was a bit of falling into that really, but the connections that I gathered from that and the skills were perhaps not technical, but they were certainly around project management, logistics, and around people management. And those are probably the, you know, some of the most valuable skills you can do. If you can deal with people, if you can work under that kind of stress and pressure, they were really valuable. But yeah, it was an interesting time.
So just to make this clear, you got paid to travel around the world. Is that?
That's right. That's right.
A good way to do it. Yeah.
It was brilliant. It was brilliant. Yeah, it was a fun time, you know, and to have you know, the company credit card paying for everything was was great.
Very good.
Yeah, yeah.
No, yeah, no, that's it. I just wanted to find out a bit more about that because I can tell you had a passion for collaboration and information
Yeah, yeah.
sharing.
I
So
mean,
it's just interesting to see where it came from. Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, it was a job that allowed me to be outside, you know. So basically 10, 12 weeks of the year I was outside hiking, walking along the coast, you know. I was climbing, and that's all I really knew that I liked, and so followed that. It was only sort of, the years went by, the opportunity at Shell, things start to get a bit more serious, and yeah, life just catches up to you then a bit, and you think, I don't know, this is a bit exhausting, but yeah, it's good times.
Yeah, no, I like what you said there about following what you like and enjoy. And I
Yeah.
think if you do that, and if you have an idea, if yeah, you're getting paid for it, you enjoy it, I think, and you're passionate about it, it'll work out. I think, and yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
it's great to see that.
ultimately, ultimately you just got, if you don't know what, like, I knew I liked being outside, that's why I did geology, but if I just kept trying things, I kept just trying different things, and yeah, it's so funny because I look back on that now. It's before Instagram, it's before like LinkedIn, it was like so many, it's so different now, and I think about the experiences I had there that were just so like very much in the moment. They were just these little sort of factors that I had to deal with. um and now there's just this vast opportunity for folks to do their own little businesses, and build things that are just online. um yeah, there's a lot of opportunities now, and I think if I was that age now, that's probably what I'd be doing. I'd be trying different ventures. This is why, like, this is a great idea, this podcast idea, love it. It's just um doing things like that, not, perhaps no experience in it before, but like really willing to give stuff a go. That attitude is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Winging it is what we call it in Northern
There we
Ireland.
go. Yeah.
Winging it and learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I like that approach to life.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Thomas. I want to go back to industrial heritage in Cardiff and Wales and the future of offshore wind. What benefits do you think? What benefits do you think the offshore wind industry can give the community, and how do you think the community can get involved in projects? And I'm actually not aware. I'm sure it happens, like in terms of the energy generated. I'm sure there's some sort of like community benefits in terms of that as well. But do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of factors there that it's, and this is why it's difficult to get people to commit to, well, how are you going to make this work for the community? And truthfully, there's not a grand plan and that in place for this. How that energy is put into the grid and where it's used, I think is pretty um, ambiguous. Its chances are it's just going to be in the grid, and as much as Wales will say, well, it's on. It's in the Welsh Sea, so it's powering X many homes. That is correct. But how do you quantify that? I think the biggest opportunity that's there is that rather than looking at this from this is an offshore wind development, offshore wind array farm, whatever you want to say, it's a whole supply chain. And so, one of the things that the Crown Estate came out with last week was that this emphasis on a developer in their bid to win an area in this leasing round will need to show that they will work with the ports, the local ports, and how they'll develop that. And so when you start thinking about the manufacturing process, and then you start thinking about all of the different supply chains that need to be in place to support that, that all has to happen locally, big emphasis on local content. Then you start thinking, well, that creates jobs. And then you've got that knock-on effect. So from that offshore wind farm, there's the port development. There's the supply chain that influences that. You might not be, when I talk about skills that the direct things that are useful right now are probably around that consenting, EIA, those type of skills. However, the plan is that, in the next 5 to 10 years, as these projects become reality and actually hit the ground, that's when a workforce is really going to be needed, particularly in the sort of physical aspects of things, from the construction, port management, delivery, and everything in between, anchoring systems, concrete. from what you could argue are low skilled. I mean, I'd never describe any of those things as low skilled, but to perhaps the more office-based work, shall we say? It's that whole range of skill sets. It's that whole range that should be able to support the development, and be able to provide an income to a community. So look at something like Port Talbot that has a steel industry there. The Welsh government are working incredibly hard with Tata Steel to try and get Tata to stay there, despite their losses, which are in the millions every week, to stay there because the manufacturing process could be done for the Celtic Sea. The port could be redeveloped to construct the actual floating the floating rigs themselves. They can be moved offshore, and it's everything that goes into supporting that. Talking at a very basic high level here, but it's a vast amount of people that are going to be needed in order to make that a success. And then you've got the long-term maintenance of it. How is that going to be managed? And beyond that, it's like, well, if the Celtic Sea, if Wales and Ireland, can be the first to do these kind of things, well, Australia, the Far East, the USA, they're all hot on the heels. These are all skills that are going to be needed. And to have that opportunity to be first in line, to then be able to share those worldwide, I just think it will open doors for people, the community. Plus you're just going to have that that a stable source of income in an area in South Wales, particularly lots of the industrial parts of South Wales, that hasn't been there for 20, 25 years. So the possibilities are just vast there. Plus, you plug all that into some things like carbon capture and storage. It's happening in Milford Haven. So talking about decarbonisation of the industry, Tata Steel, another example there, we're pumping that carbon out and then taking it offshore, perhaps to the North Sea or the Irish Sea, where it can be put in the subsurface. The RWE investment in South Wales is quite significant, and they are very big on the Celtic Sea to get some of those areas, with the intention of using that power to generate hydrogen, green hydrogen. So then you talk about the hydrogen industry. So it's not just offshore wind in the Celtic Sea that's viable down here. It's all of these things, and if we can just get it right, if we can tap into enthusiasm, if we can get the planning right, and if we can do it in a timely manner, there's just such a vast opportunity.
And it's all related. There's like an interweb of supply chain, manufacturing, and the port expansion as well, to actually accommodate all these developments. And then you have the knock on from people earning more money, incomes in the communities, and all the rest of that. So exciting times ultimately. Just to finish off, do you have any advice for future environmentalists, anyone looking to get into the energy industry? Any words of wisdom from what you picked up from over the years?
Yeah, I think don't be afraid to try things, new things. Don't be put off by titles on job applications. Whether that's EIA services or whatever it is, really. Often folks will look at CVs, and although it might say only 5 years experience or 10 years experience, it's worth applying for them, because you never know. And there's such demand now for people who have an enthusiasm, that want to be involved in the renewable energy industry. It's a great time to start that journey. Now, I didn't have a huge experience of EIA. I don't have a huge experience of that side of things, but my real skill is in project management. It's in people. It's in getting teams together and getting them to deliver to a high standard. And those technical skills you will pick up as you work through it. It's only it's really only the way you're going to learn the things that you need to know is actually being in the environment. And if you can come across that way in either the CV, the interview, whatever it is, that I'd rather work with somebody like that. I'd rather have somebody who's going to work passionately on something that they want to be involved with. And there's a lot of folks making that transition. I've made it myself. My wife had 15 years working for shale gas drilling in Texas, right? So proper, oil and gas, and made the transition to project management in hydrogen, and now works successfully for a hydrogen company in Cardiff. And she loves it, absolutely loves it. So that transition is possible. There's so many tools at our fingertips these days, online courses and that will give you the confidence to go and do it. So yeah, that I would say is just don't be afraid to try new things, and reach out, make those connections. It's never been easier to reach out to folks, whether it's via LinkedIn. I can honestly say, people I was reaching out to early on were very happy to have a conversation with me about the type of skills and the type of people that they looked for in their organization. You're always going to get folks who won't reply and aren't too keen, but I'd say most folks involved in the renewable energy industry are good people, and welcome discussions around these type of things. So yeah.
Awesome. And I think you're spot on. By people that are, one, recognize that they maybe don't have all the skills, but you do know the type of person that will come into a job and learn on the job, who's willing to pick up skills, try new projects, and that's it. Yeah. I know a few people like that, and they're great to work with. You just feel the passion and the enthusiasm from them, and then they kind of just drag people along with them. They're absolutely great. So yeah, it's exciting, and hopefully we'll see more of those people in the offshore wind and energy industry. And I love the transition you've made from Shell to I love it, and your wife as well. It's fantastic. It's really good to see.
It's been a funny couple of years. I'll tell you that. It's a few junior members of staff have asked me, how could you work for Shell? And I said, look, at the time, Shell was actually pushing for more renewable, clean energy. I can't say the same for them at the moment, but it was very much a company in transition. And I'll say this for them is that there are a lot of good people at that company. And if I was going to pick a company to decarbonize the atmosphere, if we needed the financial backing and the project management skills, it would be a company like Shell. And whether we like it or not, it's just the nature of how big they are and the people they've got. I made the transition. I feel better for not being there and doing what I do now, but I don't think vilifying them is the right way to go about it.
Absolutely.
But it's a difficult topic, I know, for lots of people. That's just how it is.
Yeah, you could go down a rabbit hole of arguments and force and against, but we don't have time for that today, Thomas. So listen, it's been really, really great to speak with you. I am excited to keep up with your LinkedIn, see the progress with your team. I think your passion and passion for collaboration and innovation just comes across straight away, and it's really, really exciting. I love now you're back in Wales, Welsh heritage. I love that as well. I think it's fantastic. So listen, thanks for coming on Coastal Catch-Ups. Maybe get you on again sometime in the future.
Sure.
We'll see how it goes. But I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
No, it's been a pleasure, Sam. Thank you for having me. Diolch yn fawr. Gobeithio bych chi'n gweld chi yn y dyfodol.
Thank you very much, Thomas.